Today I want to do something a little bit different. I want to take you inside my home studio in the form of pictures because I'm still building it, and walk through what acoustic treatment I'm putting in this space and why, in the hopes that it will help you understand the thought process behind the acoustic treatment so that it doesn't feel so confusing and intimidating for you to think about what you might want to do for your home studio. Let's go and jump into it. Here I have a sketch that I've made of my space. It's just a little top-down view. And I want to talk through what I'm building in the space, what I'm DIYing for this space. And then I also want to bring in Graham from Music City Acoustics, and we're going to talk through the different products that I'm getting from Music City Acoustics to help flesh out this space. It doesn't have to be completely DIY or getting products. You can absolutely do a combination of both. I think for a lot of people, that's a sweet spot. So let's go and walk through what I'm adding to this space myself, what I'm building into this space. Starting basically from the back forward. So at the back here, we have a 5.5-inch wall. So this was 2x6-inch construction. And I'm going to do a video explaining exactly how I built this wall as well as the other walls in this space in a future video. So definitely stick around for that if that's something you think might be good for you or if you're just curious about it. But this wall behind me, I just used 2x6s to build out and used Roxol or rock wool insulation that you can just get from Lowe's or Home Depot or something. Put it in the wall, covered it with fabric as opposed to drywall, and then put some plants and some wood in front of it for a little bit of scattering or diffusion, if you will. And so this is kind of my main base trapping-ish wall. If you want to get any of that super low end or at least fairly deep low end, you need your panels to be at least 5-6 inches deep. Deeper is even better. But this was the only space where I could really afford, at least in terms of wall placement, the entire 5.5-inch depth. The other three walls, as you'll see here, these other acoustic walls is what I'm calling them, they're just going to be 3.5 inches deep. 3.5 only because standard 2x4 construction and rock wool insulation, if you just go pick it up from the store, is 3.5 inches deep, unless you get the 5.5-inch deep version. So we're going 3.5 inch deep for these other walls, and you want to go at least 3.5 inches deep everywhere that you can so that you get enough of the low-mid frequencies captured by your acoustic treatment. Now, I'm doing walls for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because I'm recording drums in here, and drums sit low to the ground. So as opposed to acoustic panels that usually start a couple feet up from the ground, drums, you really want at least some panels that are going to be all the way down to the ground. So instead of doing a bunch of individual panels and having them go all the way from the ground up, I'm just building a wall that is going to go from the ground up to roughly about 6-7 feet high. And that has to do mostly with the fact that I have this soffit here that kind of restricts my height a little bit. But it's going to be high enough that I'm also going to be capturing the cymbals and the reflections from the cymbals to a pretty decent degree. And I'm treating evenly across the room so that when I put my speakers in this space, it'll be very even for me to hear all of the reflections around the room. It's not going to be leaning in one direction or another too much. Obviously, I have that soffit that I can't get rid of, which is a bummer, this over here, but we're working around it. You got to work with what you have, right? So as good as you can possibly make it should always be the goal. Now, for a lot of people, you don't necessarily need to build whole walls, acoustic panel walls. For some people, it might save you a little bit of money if you want a lot of acoustic treatment. If you're recording super loud sources like drums, you probably want a decent amount of acoustic treatment in a smaller space. And so these walls are very efficient in that way. But for a lot of people, just building or buying 2x4 roughly, 2 foot by 4 foot roughly acoustic panels and spacing them out on the walls to be even and to capture the reflections and or intentionally placed in a way that gives you kind of like a dead corner to help you get cleaner recordings might be the way to go for you. Okay, so after the walls, the next thing I'm going to be building are these tube traps. And tube traps are functionally just 6-foot high acoustic treatment in tube form. So if you just imagine this tube, but 6 feet high. And I'm doing this because I have a breaker box back here. I have an outlet over here. So I want to still have access to these places, but I need acoustic treatment to limit the reflections back there and also to capture some of the low-end frequencies. Corners are a great place to capture low-end frequencies. And so tube traps are a great option because they're movable. They're gobos. They're very, very easy to build compared to other forms of DIY acoustic treatment because you just buy pipe insulation. They come in 3-foot segments and you just glue them together and then wrap them in fabric. So compared to other forms of DIY acoustic treatment, these are much, much easier. They're not the most inexpensive or the least expensive, but they're a great option if you're looking for an easy DIY project. And if this is all you could do, you could also just take some panels like this and kind of wrap them all around you. Like if you built 6 like I'm going to, you could just have them around you in a circle while you're recording vocals or something. That's going to capture basically all the reflections all around you. So a lot of fun options with this. I can move these in and out of the space if I wanted to, but mostly I'm just doing them in this way to play around with different DIY options for you and also for myself, but also so that I have access back into these spaces. It's kind of a gobo of sorts that I can move. Okay, I think let's go ahead and kick it over to Graham from Music City Acoustics. He's going to walk us through a little bit of a 3D model he made. Let's check it out. So Graham, what do we have? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so I put together a SketchUp model of your room based off the drawing that you had that we were just looking at, and I don't have kind of all of the wall treatment or the tube traps in here yet, but I do have the different treatments that we were talking about that you might get from us for this. And so, the biggest things being kind of the cloud and ceiling treatment, and then these movable gobos. And I think starting kind of with the gobos here, that would give you the ability to treat kind of those front corners in your room. The front wall, which is kind of missing from this, would be treated as well, kind of across the whole length of the wall there. So really kind of full wall front coverage, which is great. Really going to help from a clarity standpoint, stereo imaging, and then those gobos in the corners will be really effective, low frequency absorbers, but also allow you to get in and out of the room, which is hugely important. So you've got that
Yeah.
that door there. And that's the main door. It's the only door in and out of the room. So having the ability to have something that's like on gobo or on casters and is easily moved in and out of the way when you need to get in and out of the room is super important. And one of kind of my favorite things about the gobos is just how flexible they are. They work really well, kind of as shown here, as corner treatment for low frequency control. They can work really well as like your main back wall treatment, again for low
Mm.
frequency control, like with a mix setup. But then, of course, utilizing them for different recording situations where you've got, drums in your case, kind of one of the main things that might be getting recorded here in this space, or vocals. You can bring those in really tight and get really, really dry, controlled drum sounds, or you could flip them around to like the pegboard side where you want more reflections and kind of a more diffused, scattered, high frequency response, but still a really cool, unique sound that you can get from that. Kind of more indicative of like 70s studios and design that was really common
Mm.
back then. So they're just super flexible. You can use them to kind of create all sorts of different scenarios for recording, and then again from like a monitoring standpoint, really great way to get low frequency control because you can have air gaps behind them, pull them off of the wall or the boundaries, um, and you can do a lot with them.
The gobos could be like in a home studio scenario. They give you basically the ability to have the optimal setup for tracking, but then also put them into the space where you may or may not have, or where you may not have enough treatment in your corners, for example, or if you
Yeah,
don't have enough, like if you haven't set up your speakers or your room focused on mixing, but you want to be able to mix in it sometimes, you could roll them to the sides to catch your early reflections off the wall, and basically just gives you that versatility to uh, do whatever you need to do in your space.
yeah, absolutely. It's even in like larger rooms, we've done some studios like bigger, kind of more commercial size spaces where they're just like, hey, can we put gobos everywhere? And you
Mm.
really create like a kind of a full gobo studio space around it, and it's kind of one of my favorite ways to treat a room because you get, the air gap between the walls and the boundaries that makes them so
Hmm.
much more effective at low frequencies, and is super flexible. So you can really do anything with them. They're a great way to treat small rooms, big rooms, and control rooms, and tracking rooms, and everything in between.
Yeah. Awesome. And then, as you said earlier, the gobas y'all make have the pegboard on the back for diffusion, so you can flip it around and have a livelier sound while still capturing some of that extra low end buildup. Uh, or you
Yeah,
can keep them all absorptive and capture the whole frequency response and just kind of deaden the room. That's
for sure.
awesome.
I guess, yeah. And then the last thing is like obviously Gobos kind of started out from bigger studios back in the day, tracking full bands. You can, of
Mm.
course, use them. They're on wheels, so they can be moved around easily, like I was saying earlier. And you can use them to like partition two people, whether it's you got an acoustic guitar player and somebody singing, um, or a full orchestra. We just worked on a orchestral like scoring stage where they put a bunch of the gobos in there to break up, French horns and the orchestra and the brass and everything else. So kind of anywhere where you need acoustic treatment, they're a great way to do it.
That's awesome. The next thing that we're putting in here is the clouds. And could you talk about the importance of the clouds and then kind of the configuration, and feel free to kind of spin that around if you want to kind of show how they are relative to what's going on in the space.
Yeah,
Yeah, awesome.
absolutely. So the main one, or I'll start with the one above the listening position and above kind of the speakers here. And so that's we've got like a 6 by 4 foot bass trap panel, so that's 6.5 inches deep. And from a low frequency standpoint and a monitoring standpoint, if you want accurate mixes that are going to translate really well, and you want accurate monitoring and things to be balanced, in home studios, it's massively important to get the floor to ceiling room modes in check. And typically, like if you got an 8 foot ceiling, that's gonna be around 140 hertz. And if you've got like an 8.5, 9 foot ceiling, that'll go down a little bit to like 130. So it's like right in that range where the low end of vocal sits and acoustic guitars and pianos, and so much of the clarity of a lot of the instruments and
And
sound sources and things.
what is a mode for people who may not know that term?
Yeah. Thank you. So basically your room, I like to think about rooms as pipes essentially. So if you think of like a pipe organ,
Hmm.
each note has a pipe that's a different length. And your room's essentially the same thing, except instead of having 88 pipes, you've got three main ones. And so you've
Hmm.
got like your front to back room mode, and that's going to be one pipe. So if your room's 10 feet long, it's going to be, I'm not that good at math. This was a terrible idea. Um, but you can figure out like what the
Yeah.
resonant frequency of that would be. So um, if your room's 10 feet long, it's going to be 112 hertz. Um,
Okay.
I don't know what note that is, but that's the frequency that it's really going to resonate at a ton. So you're going to have depending on where you're at in the room, potentially a ton of energy there. Um, in this particular case, you'd have a ton of energy right in the middle of the room, and then like right up against the front and the back walls. And then if you halved that frequency, you would only have a ton of energy right up against the front wall and right up against the back wall, because that's kind of how the waveform's traveling through the room. So it's essentially just room modes are the short version of this is they are the frequencies at which your room resonates. So if you've ever been in a room and you're listening back to music and all of a sudden like there's a low frequency note that's being played on the bass and it just kind of really jumps out at you,
Hmm.
that's the result of a room mode. Um, and so they are the things that can make the sound of your room be really uneven and really imbalanced. And we want to kind of control those and compress them and squish them down as much as possible so that they're not making such big, wide variations in like the frequency response and the decay time of your room.
Got it. And the cloud is very important in this because uh, having it split it, I think we forget about the fact that sound is bouncing off the ceiling as well. And
Yep.
with low frequencies, even if you have rug in your room, you're very likely still going to have a fair amount of that resonance because it's fairly independent of just short or thin absorption. You need something
Yeah.
thicker to really be able to break it up. So you need at least something 6 inches. So if you are standing on 6 inch rug, you might be fine. But my guess is you're probably not standing on, and I mean 6 inch deep rug. But if you're not doing that, then you probably need to be thinking about this to some extent at least. And so for I'd say everybody, a cloud is actually a very functional piece to put in the studio. And specifically, it's going to target that low end. So a deeper cloud, especially over the mix position, but also over. So if you're not putting your cloud for mixing, if you're just putting it for recording, what depth do you think is kind of like the minimum that people should be considering?
Yeah. Let me back up real quick just
Yeah,
on the other one because the cloud is really important from like a mixing standpoint for low frequencies, but also your mids and your highs, and that really
very good
plays
point. Yes.
into the accuracy and detail that you're going to get from your monitors and your stereo imaging and all the things that really help you make good decisions when you're listening back to things. Because like in your room, for example, the ceilings, other than the front wall, is the closest reflection point that you're going to have, and you're going to
Hmm.
have with the way that your speakers work, you're going to have more reflections off the ceiling than the front wall. So like that's a really critical area. Um, in a lot of spaces for not only low frequencies but also your mids and your highs as well. Um, and then the same thing does really apply a lot, quite often with panels if you're thinking about it more so from a tracking or recording standpoint. So in this case, your question was like kind of the depth of the panels. I think with acoustic treatment, deeper is always better. The deeper it is, the more even it's going to absorb across the frequency spectrum, and that means you're going to have less boominess, less muddiness, less resonances, and that makes everything that you're recording clear. It means there's gonna be less work to do, like on the EQ front when you get to the mixing side of things. Um, so deeper is better, but I think for most like music related applications, when it comes to recording, I really try to at least make everything 4 inches deep. There's a lot of treatment out there that's an inch deep or 2 inches deep, and it will help. So it's not like it's an inch is you shouldn't put an inch deep acoustic treatment in your studio. That will create, for the most part, more problems than it solves. But like 2 inches can be really effective from a tracking standpoint. It will work pretty well all the way down to like 250 hertz. So it's covering a lot of that mid range, even some of that low mid range, and will give you a lot more clarity, a lot less reverb, a lot less of that room sound to really enhance the quality of your recordings. And then if you can push that to 4 inches, it's always going to be a better option.
Gotcha. So for a cloud, for any purpose, at least 4 inches. If you're buying Rockwell, maybe 3.5 inches because that's
Yeah,
the standard size. But in general, 4 inches, if you can get it, is really what you should be shooting for. And then
for sure.
and deeper if you can afford the space, uh,
Yeah.
losing that extra 2 inches in your from your ceiling.
Yeah, if you've got the room and you can make it work budget wise, the deeper it is, the better it's going to be.
Okay, that's great. That's what it comes down to is if a thinner panel won't stop mid to low frequencies, a thicker panel will stop lower to mid frequencies, and all of them will stop upper, mid, and high frequencies
Yeah,
as long as they're at least
exactly.
2 inches thick. Okay, great. And so then we also are doing so that's the cloud over the mix position, and then over the drums, and then also probably have some vocals and stuff back here. We're looking at basically adding clouds to also contain that same both the room modes, but also just the reflections off of the ceiling. Especially with something like drums, you don't want a lot of high frequencies just bouncing back straight into the overheads that are going to be up there anyway. And
Yeah.
if you, yeah, and we're looking at kind of symmetrical, so not just doing it over the drums because I don't want when I'm mixing it to be uneven behind my right ear because there's no cloud over the right, the right side of the room from my perspective. So basically treating that entire space equally. So those clouds will likely be a little bit higher. Broadband, maybe bass trap if we can get them space wise in here.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. So clouds, I think we covered clouds pretty well. And then I see that you had the scatter, the couplers, space couplers. Did I see those off the
I
screen?
haven't. Oh, yeah. I do have them in the model. I don't have them in the room yet.
Okay. So we're also adding some space coupling diffusers, which are basically a form of diffusion that will allow, they're like a bunch of little squares. So sound passes through them, but it spreads out the frequency spectrum kind of throughout. And so the idea with these, you can see it on the screen here, is that I'm going to ground stack them so they're about 4 feet high. So they're about 2 feet, right, Graham?
Yeah, exactly. They're
Individually.
2 by 2 feet, and if you all, yeah,
So ground stack two of them, and you have a little 4-foot gobo that I can then take and move around the room, and it will allow me to have a mic on the other side of that diffuser that will make the room seem bigger. Right? You were just telling me that you did a Instagram post, so people can check this out on Music City Acoustics Instagram a few years back of you were playing drums with just like a kick mic and a room mic, and showing the impact that just having these space coupling diffusers between the drum kit and the room mic gives in terms of the sense of space that mic has, or that
yeah,
drum kit has in the room. So it basically makes a small room feel bigger and more even because as opposed to really focused waveforms just going straight at the microphone, they hit the diffuser first, spread out, and then they're going to be much more like diffuse across the entire frequency spectrum as opposed to like really focused frequency energy.
yeah. And it just kind of jump in there. They're the way that these work is kind of unique because they don't. A lot of diffusers, if you take like a quadratic residue diffuser, a
Mm-hmm.
QRD, or primitive root diffuser, the ones that look kind of like skylines, those, they typically need quite a bit of space to really work to spread that sound out into the room and to kind of let it bloom outwards. Whereas these work really well in small rooms. So
Mm.
if you've got a home studio, a smaller kind of bedroom studio, most of the time using a QRD or PRD diffuser is not going to work very well, and you're not really going to get a lot out of it. These make really a massive improvement to the just kind of the character and the tone of the room if you're capturing drums or acoustic guitars or strings, any sort of instrument that has a has some of its character comes from the room. These can do really great things and also are really great from like a mixing and monitoring standpoint too, just adding more depth and space and air to the room. Um, So, but like using them in drum tracking setups is really kind of one of my favorite ways. And the video that you were talking about was actually, they weren't in between the microphone and the drum set.
Oh,
Um,
really?
no, the drum set was like I had a stereo ribbon mic set up kind of like right over the kick, kind
Oh,
of the
okay.
show, like kind of, if you imagine it floating where this isn't very helpful. It was like, it was above the kick more or less.
Okay. Okay.
Hard to show here. And then the space couplers were actually like around the room,
So
fairly similar
even
to
not
this.
between, it was increasing the sense of space.
Yeah, because it a lot of that sound comes back to your, in this
Mm-hmm.
case, it's a ribbon mic and it was a stereo mic, so it's getting sound from
Both
the front
sides.
and the back
Yeah.
and the left and the right, and that's what it's capturing is a lot of that sound coming back towards it, but also just like the sound of the drums changes when the room and the environment changes,
Mm-hmm.
and so you've got all these little kind of individual squares here, and as high and mid frequencies go into those squares, they basically bounce around in each little compartment, and that changes
Mm.
the time at which they're traveling in the room, which is then breaking them up and kind of redistributing that energy over time, which creates a more even, more balanced, and really just kind of better sounding environment. Um, and so they don't have to be between your mics and the drums or the source. You could certainly do that, but they really just kind of enhance the overall sound of the room itself,
That's
um,
cool.
and make it a lot more balanced and less harsh, and really great sounding. They're really one of my favorite kind of things that we make, particularly for drums.
Yeah. Okay. That's good clarification for me. I love to hear, like, just understand the nuances of them a little bit better. It's something I've seen people use and I've heard people talk about, but I can't wait to have them in the space and actually start playing
Yeah,
around with it and finding tones and seeing how they can shape the sounds. Could you tell me just a little bit about how you would position them, in a gobo configuration in this space when I'm mixing? Is that something that would you keep them in the room when mixing?
yeah. I probably would. It depends a
Yeah.
little bit. I think the biggest caveat there is it depends on like the treatment that's in the room. Obviously, we've
Sure.
talked about that
Yeah.
quite a bit at this point. And so like knowing that you're going to have the sidewalls fully treated, I would probably, if you got like 4 stacks like this or 3 stacks, I would do, like probably if there are 4. So if we do 4 here, like, let me throw these around real quick. So you could put these, just even leave them on the floor, but do like 2 of these on your right wall and 2 of them on the left wall when you're
Okay.
mixing. Um, that would be that's how I would probably go about it, particularly since you already have the scatter face design behind you.
Yeah.
This will just kind of, enhance. It'll give you better imaging, better depth. Um, you'll notice, you will hear kind of some more high frequency reflections. So
Yeah.
that's where that aspect of things can be a little bit of a preferential thing. Like, do you like it? Do you not like it? Um, Imaging and like depth will absolutely be better, but having more high frequency information is a little bit more of like, do you like this or do you not like it? But
Mm.
that's how I would position 'em.
Awesome. Okay, so just basically off to the sides to try to kind of even that out and
Yeah,
give a little bit more life to the sides. Okay, awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to play around with that. And yeah, 2, 4. I'm not or 3, 4. I'm not exactly sure where we'll go there. So that gives me a lot of good options because I could even just do one on either side, and it's still going to give you that
for
same kind
sure.
of idea. And then I have advantage of this studio is I have a storage room. So if I don't want to have something in the space, I'll just toss it over there.
Yeah.
Do the space couplers lengthwise? I know you guys make like little feet for panels to make your panels into gobos. Would those same feet work with these space couplers, or are they stable enough on their own to stand? They're about what, 2 inches deep or 4? No, 2
They're
inches deep. Is
two
that
and a
right?
half inches deep,
Okay.
which is a good question. I guess, yeah, we make a 2.5 inch bookend. So we've got the bookend feet that work with our
Yeah.
high mid panels and the broadband panels and the bass trap panels. And the high mid ones would fit the space couplers. I don't think anybody's ever asked or done it that
All
way,
right.
but yeah,
Look at
they would
me.
fit.
Look
You
at
can be the
me.
first.
I'm going to be the first.
Yeah,
That's awesome. And that's actually a great point that I just want to make too, since we talked about the gobos earlier. And obviously the full size gobo, pretty big, fairly expensive, not necessarily going to work in everybody's home studio, but you could get a couple of panels that you have hung up on the walls and a couple of feet that you keep, in a closet that you pull out that turn every panel that's in your room into now a gobo if you want it to be. Am I right in thinking that?
yeah. I mean, we keep calling it, like, I think basically anything that's movable a gobo, but
Yes,
and that's really
technically, I
kind
know
of.
there's a little bit of a distinction, but
Oh, I was gonna say that
yeah,
really is like all it is just like a movable thing, and that's kind of like the common term for it. But yeah, the
yeah,
gobos aren't like massively different than like a regular panel. We build like a specific thing as a gobo, but like yeah, it's just an acoustic panel. And so you can take, we make feet, and we've got like bookend feet and our easel stands that we make for our panels, but you could also just take a scrap piece of wood and screw it to the bottom of,
mm.
your panels to help stabilize it. That was when I was still recording and had a studio. That was how all of my freestanding panels
Just
were built
screwed
for
to
a
a
very
little
long
plywood
time.
sheet or something,
Just
or a little,
yeah,
yeah.
super simple, super easy. Um, yeah, so
Smart.
you can get the feet for them, but you also don't need anything fancy to make that
Yeah,
happen, and have really flexible freestanding treatment.
I love it. Yeah. So point being, even if these gobos that we talked about in this video aren't the exact right ones for you, I still think the idea of a gobo and the flexibility that it's going to give you is something you could think about with the panels that you do invest in, the panels you build, whatever you're getting. You don't necessarily have to go. These are what, 3 foot by 6 foot panels, so they're perfect for my space
Yeah,
size wise. But I think for some people, just taking the smaller panels and throwing some feet on them, or as you said, just screwing it to a plywood board might be the exact right option.
yeah.
That's awesome. Well,
Sometimes simple is the best thing.
that's right. Yeah, what I love about this and what I'm excited about is the versatility of the setup, the quality of treatment for the clouds, and the fact that that's going to contain the whole frequency spectrum fairly well. And that's going to reduce a lot of the reflections in here because, as you said, it's the first point for the speakers, and it's the first point with cymbals and things like that as well. So it's a
Yeah,
big part is cleaning up the reflections there. And then I'm actually going to be standing mixing, so it's even closer to my head.
for sure. Yeah,
And so it's just another consideration for me. But then I also love the versatility. The gobos can be part of the recording setup, and then I can pop them into the corners to make the room great for mixing. But then, and they themselves have the reflective and the more absorptive side, so they can be a tool to help me shape what I'm recording, and then a tool to help me make my room more even when I'm mixing. So it's the versatility is really what I'm after, and I think you all make an awesome selection of products for that. And yeah, I'm really excited
yeah.
to get
Well,
it in
thank you.
here.
Do you always stand while you mix?
I do. Yeah. So, and this
Okay,
is a
cool.
new thing. I haven't had a speaker configuration yet for standing while mixing, but I've been mixing. Well, I mean, I have, but I haven't had like the fully treated room and everything. So it's a new thing that I'm figuring out. And I basically just got a rolling desk that's just going to have my controllers and my wireless keyboard and wireless trackpad, so that I can just roll it back into my position when I'm ready, when I'm mixing. And then if I'm not mixing, I can still listen from the speakers if I'm, just listening back from the drums or whatever, but I'm not
Yeah,
setting up. So I'll have an idealized mix spot, but I'm not dedicating space to that at all times. So it keeps the center of the room totally open. It's going to be fun. I'm excited for
that's
this room.
awesome. And
Yeah.
going back, kind of pulling that back to the room modes and the room residences, having 8-foot ceilings, which is like
Yes.
very common here in the US, in home studios is a big challenge because it puts your head right in the middle of the room. And so standing actually will do quite a bit to help kind of smooth out your low frequency response because your head's not going to be in the
Interesting.
middle of the room. And so like that 140 hertz resonance will still be there, and we still want to control it, but it won't be as bad because you're going to be a little bit up. Your head's going to be higher up and your ears are going to be higher up, and just will help make things that much better.
It basically has to do because when you're sitting, you're at roughly almost in an 8 foot room, almost exactly center, right? And
Yeah.
center is where you get the biggest buildup, or like that's where that mode is going to be kind of at
Biggest
its.
buildup and the biggest null. So it's basically the
Ah,
least balanced place in the room.
so standing. Okay, so for everyone out there, standing is better. Just stand while you mix, okay?
Yeah.
I'm trying to sell people on this. I don't know why I care about it, but no, that's actually something that when I started thinking about the space, I thought, I hate sitting while mixing. Why would I would almost put in like a standard studio desk, or like when I was designing it, thought like,
Yeah.
let's just do a standard studio desk. And I thought, why would I commit to sitting? Like, I'd love to stand. I've been standing for mixing for like the last 4 or 5 years, and I just like it better, even just mixing on, whatever. I just like to stand. So there's something that's more energizing about it. I can kind of get into the music a little bit more. If I'm sitting, I'm more stagnant, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be really great. And and now there's a scientific reason that it's better.
There is a benefit to it. I think it is like a big commitment, and
yeah, for sure.
I think with monitoring and learning like what your room sounds like and your speakers sound like, you don't really want to be like going back and forth to like standing and sitting, because you're like, if you're standing, your speakers need to be at the right height. If you're sitting, your speakers need to be at the right height. And no matter how well treated your room is, when you move your speakers up and down, they're going to sound different. And when you move your head, things are going to sound different. So it's like, if you can make it work where you stand all the time, that's awesome. If you want to sit, that's also great.
Yeah.
I think, but it is challenging to like really have a setup for both, where you like, you know, the room that well and you've learned it and like can really do both really well. So it's definitely a commitment, I think, one way or the other.
Well, and that's a very good point that I'll just caveat my previous statement with, that I do think if you're not someone who is used to standing, and sure, you want to stand for, you know, hours at a time, then maybe it's not the best thing for you.
Yeah.
But consider it. At least consider it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm standing right now.
That's right. Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, I'm new to this, in this new format, this new space for these videos. I'm sitting, and it's new to me. It's kind of weird, but I'm enjoying it in its own way. But when I mix, I'm definitely going to be standing at like a little standing desk right in the center. But yeah.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Okay. Well, Graham, thank you so much. It was super cool. Very excited to get these in the studio, and yeah, awesome.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we're excited to get them over to you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and got some ideas from it for your home studio. If you did, definitely let me know down in the comments below. I don't want you to leave this video thinking, oh my gosh, I have to do all that acoustic treatment. I'm doing a lot of acoustic treatment for two main reasons. One, I'm recording drums, which need those panels near to the ground and needs a lot of acoustic treatment, especially in a small space. If you're not recording something as loud as drums, then you might not necessarily need this amount of acoustic treatment. I've also been doing this for well over a decade, so I have a lot of specific things that I'm going for with this acoustic treatment. If you're just getting started out with recording and or acoustic treatment, you don't need to go from 0 to 100. I'd recommend just getting a few panels and placing them intentionally. Now, if you are in the US, Music City Acoustics on their website has a place where you can get free advice. You can let them know exactly what your room is like, what your goals in that room are going to be, and what your budget is, and they can give you some specific recommendations. So definitely check that out at musiccity.acoustics.com. And with all this, I just want you to be thinking about the versatility and the intentionality of the acoustic treatment. With everything in music production, the why matters just as much, if not more, than the actual how. So why you're doing something, being intentional with it. And there's so much about acoustic treatment that if you just had a couple of panels and replacing them intentionally, maybe following some of that versatility that we talked about there at the end, where you could take a panel off the wall and stick it on some feet or stick it on one of those easels from Music City Acoustics or something like that, you could have a very versatile setup that lets you be very intentional with your acoustic treatment to get great results, even without a whole bunch of it. Okay, so definitely check out musiccity.acoustics.com if you're interested in that. Not a sponsor, just a big fan of their stuff. And if you don't already have it, be sure to grab my Home Studio Pro checklist from the link in the description below. It goes through the 4 steps to help you create a professional home studio that makes creating professional sounding music easy. It's completely free from the link in the description below, so be sure to pick it up. If this video was helpful, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next week in another video.